Well, let's talk about cognitive sovereignty. So you've heard already multiple times today the importance of social technology. You've seen the quote by Samo Borja. It was mentioned multiple times. And this talk is my answer to the question of what I think the right social technology is. And I will lay out to you why I think it matters and how, if you're convinced, you can participate in it. I have given precisely this talk, or pretty much the same talk before, so some of you might already know these ideas. And I was debating with myself whether I should write something new, but I very deeply also believe that it's always better to repeat important ideas instead of randomly running into a new direction. And I do think these ideas matter as they are. And secondly, which you will also now learn in the talk, it doesn't just matter what you've heard once and what you know, but it very profoundly matters what you know that others know. So the part that, if you know the ideas already, the part that you're now here in this room and you see that others have also heard them is also part of the information, because to coordinate, one of the key ideas is the idea of common ground, common epistemic ground, common normative ground, and the common ground is constantly eroding and needs to be constantly rebuilt. And this is part of what I'm trying to do here in setting some ideas of what important norms of conduct can be. So when we talk about governance, what is governance? In a very deep sense, we are trying to solve the question of collective intelligence, collective action problems. And for doing this, we also need to solve the questions of collective epistemology. And as an axiom of conduct, this requires that individuals can stand their ground in the cognitive realm. We need to make sense of the world to act in it collectively, and to do so, we have to do so individually. Bernhard in Istanbul gave a very nice introduction to my session, and he also mentioned the importance of, well, when we talk about culture, when we talk about new culture, new society, a very important idea is always required is a new citizen. I think historically this idea has been very much abused to push people and humans beyond what they are, and totalitarian states do this as well. But I also do think there are there is progress possible in how we conduct ourselves, and often this can be by just fully integrating ideas that have already been culturally achieved. So without further ado, let's talk about cognitive sovereignty and taking epistemic responsibility in the meta-crisis. One book I dearly love is by John Gall, and it's called The Systems Bible. It's very short, it's very funny, and it's very to the point about how human systems work and how they fail in dramatic and foreseeable and funny ways. And the premise here is, well, first, humans build a system to solve a problem. Now they have two problems. You all know it's true. So systems show unexpected behavior, and most systems fail and develop goals of their own. They fail in ways we can understand, and it's important to understand so. When we talk about governance systems, about new societies, about politics, then, well, first of all, it is a systems of choice making for courses of action on collective problems, but they have historically often failed catastrophically. And there are so many examples I don't even know where to start. So the idea here is we need a bottom-up axiom of individual conduct that stands against these dangers in cognitive sovereignty. This bottom-up axiom is cognitive sovereignty. Herbert Simon, the founder of, well, Nobel Prize winner in economics, but also the initiator and founder of the idea of bounded rationality, created this scissors analogy for cognition. So bounded rationality means, well, we try to be rational, we try to do the right things with the information we have, but we're very limited, so we have to prioritize and work with the limited resources we have. And we're in this limbo between two important parts. One is the context, the big world, the complexity of the real world, but also, well, top-down systems and so forth. And we have to always compress the information with our very, very limited cognition to make sense out of it. And it's this interplay of those two parts, those two blades interacting with one another. And well, I think many here want to find technological solutions and in the end create new governance systems. And what I'm focusing here on is the bottom-up answer. Like what do we individually have to do or contribute to make this possible? So what is cognitive sovereignty and what does it mean to take epistemic responsibility? And for anyone who's been on Twitter or X, you know the term already. In the Urban Dictionary, there's a term called based. And cognitive sovereignty is basically the same idea as being based. And being based means, well, you recognize someone for being themselves. They're courageous and unique, and most importantly, they stand their ground. They're based in their own opinions. They're based in their own worldview, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're like very competitive. It just means they have boundaries around themselves in an important way. And it's the opposite of cringe, and it's the opposite of biased, which not necessarily true. Everyone is biased, but it's yet an important principle, and it's also funny. To think about cognitive sovereignty, two of the most important ideas are the ideas of truth and truthfulness. And they interact with one another in an important way. So what is truth? Well, truth means that you actually wrestle with how reality works, because the more you understand the world, the better you are in reaching your goals, and being wrong about it in any way that's relevant to your goals usually significantly backfires. And truthfulness means a state of being, well, because you can't actually ever know the truth because the world is very, very complex. Truthfulness means you're talking or in a state of talking coherently to how you think about the world, right? Like you're truthful, well, if you're not lying in a sense. Hannah Arendt, in The Origins of Totalitarianism, said, "The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, for example, the reality of experience, and the distinction between the true and the false, for example, the standards of thought, no longer exist." So this points at this important example of how, well, historically, when people lose their cognitive sovereignty, this has also led to political downfalls. Why does it matter? Because, well, we often have very, very grand ideas of what utopias we want to achieve, and it can be a very quick seduction to think, well, right, we know what we have to do. We can lie in regards to our goals because we know already what is true. But, well, if only it were all so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. So the idea is, when you start losing the touch with the deeper truth of reality, even if you think it's for the higher good, and in particular if you're doing it for the higher good, it will come back to haunt you. And this, if you don't know Alexander Solzhenitsyn, this is from a book called The Gulag Archipelago, where he writes about his own experience in the Gulag system of the Soviet Union. And it's a principle that runs through his entire work, and also what him and other authors or survivors have again and again perceived. He says, "One man who stopped lying could bring down a tyranny, and the simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie." And this is hard, right? I mean, often we swim in water. Maybe you know the speech by David Foster Wallace, but often the most dangerous lies are the ones that you don't see, because they're so pervasive that you're completely blind to them. And the first person to notice it and speak up about it can cause a huge cascade in information. The most archetypal representation of this situation is, of course, the emperor that has no clothes, where everyone is bowing to the authority because nobody's speaking up that he's actually not draped in fine clothes, but naked. But there's the child that sees it for what it is, and it screams, "The emperor has no clothes." And in this moment, you have this significant coordination moment where everyone realizes that what they saw was in fact true. They had seen it all along, but they were failing their Asch conformity experiment. And from one moment to the next, just by one person speaking up, in this case a child, the whole situation changes from one to the other in 1 second. So truth and truthfulness, they mutually, well, they each important, but they also mutually afford one another, and this is what I'm going to talk about next. So here's some example from behavioral economics. They're called cognitive reflection tasks, and the name already gives part of it away. So the ones of you who already know them, don't shout out, but okay, let's start. A bat and a ball costs £1.10 in total. If the bat costs £1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Very good. So it's 5 cents. If it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? Correct. Very good. In a lake, there's a patch of lily pads. The patch doubles in size every day. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long does it take for the patch to cover half of the lake? Very nice. Okay. Who noticed what is going on in your mind while you do this? Okay, I'm going to tell you because there's a beautiful diagram. So first of all, so Daniel Kahneman and his collaborator Amos Tversky, who could not receive the prize, but Daniel Kahneman received the Nobel Prize for his work on thinking fast and slow, and it basically shows these ideas, which is the idea that a lot of our cognition, because we have such limited, right, we have such limited capacity, a lot of our cognition gets automated, and it's very fast, it's effortless, and we have very little control over it. We don't even notice it. It's just our habits. It's, in a sense, who we are. But there's also our ability to detach from it and apply more decoupled cognition that applies more effortful algorithmic thinking to also test maybe and then feed into what our automated cognition is doing. And all of these tasks, all of these tests, we're doing exactly that. There was an intuitive first response that came to your mind, like, of course you think 10 cents first, right? But oh, no, actually that's not correct. And then you do the more effortful thinking, you override the response. And everyone who did actually say something did it correctly. And for this to happen, there's exactly this multiple steps necessary, right? So most likely the automatic but false response will come to your mind. And now you have multiple options, like you could just blur it out, right, immediately. But there's this other part in your brain that's I'm not 100% sure about this. And then you notice this voice in your head, and then if you have the right software, right, if you have never learned to apply mathematics correctly, you're not able to solve it. You need both certain dispositions and choices, but also certain software. Then you can do the right calculation and override the first wrong automatic response. So this was done by Stanovich, and there's a wonderful book called The Rationality Quotient. So why am I talking about this? So there's one psychotherapist called Gendlin, and he talks about the idea of the felt sense and wrestling at the edge of what you can verbalize with your body. He argues that this ability, which he calls focusing, is what differentiates people who successfully go to psychotherapy and people who unsuccessfully go to psychotherapy. And the idea is, well, there's something going on, there's something you know, and now you can produce words. He calls it, you create a handle. Now you have what you think is true in your hand, and now you can look at it and do a second round. And you can look, wait, are these the correct words, right? Am I saying what I actually think? And you can re-examine it. And by this process, you can integrate your embodied knowledge fully with what you're saying, and fully also unearth further what you even think you're thinking. So this is the idea of creating a process to achieve integrity, and integrity between what you often deeply know, which is a lot of it is in your body and how you feel about certain things, with what you are able to verbalize, and to also recognize that it is this ongoing process, a dialectic process between the two. And it can be a very fruitful process to, for a while, don't say anything you don't believe. Notice when you say things you don't believe, because we do it all the time. On less wrong, there's the litany of Gendlin, basically a little prayer, and it's called, "What is true is already so. Owning up to it doesn't make it worse. Not being open about it doesn't make it go away. And because it's true, it is what is there to be interacted with. Anything untrue isn't there to be lived. People can stand what is true, for they are already enduring it." So this is the idea of how, well, on one hand there's truth and it matters, but on the other hand, achieving integrity with what you actually believe in your ability to, in what you're saying, can also help you to unearth what you yourself think is actually true, to then positively contribute further into the information ecology. While sometimes it can, of course, still be reasonable to not say everything you actually think, but it's important to know what you actually think, and then you can still make the choice about it. So what does it mean to take epistemic responsibility, and why does this matter? In the book, or the essays, called The Ethics of Belief, Clifford talks about a boat owner, and he's debating whether he should send one current boat out with men on it and a lot of goods. And deep down, he already knows there are some parts loose. He didn't do the last checking of all the equipment properly as he should. But you know what? I mean, he just can't be bothered today. Let's just send them out. And they're not drowning, they survive. But the question is, did he do something unethical, independently of what the actual outcome was? And Clifford argues, yes, he did do something unethical because he applied rationalization. He wanted to have a certain outcome of what he's believing, so he could just do the easier thing. But the likely outcome, because he was not properly grappling with truth, was that he was harming people by pushing down one part inside of him instead of listening to it and doing the right thing. And this shows also the difference between reasoning and rationalization. Reasoning is when you go through the steps of processing information to come to your conclusions, versus rationalization is, well, there's a conclusion that you want to come to, motivated reasoning, right? It's nice, and you then accept it as so because it would be pretty effortful to do otherwise. He says, to sum up, it is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. Very hard bar. If a man holding a belief which he was taught in childhood or persuaded of afterwards, keeps down and pushes away any doubts which arise about it in his mind, purposely avoids the reading of books and the company of men that call into question or discuss it, and regards as impious those questions which cannot easily be asked without disturbing it. The life of the man is one long sin against mankind. So it goes beyond just, well, listening to what you're actually thinking. It goes towards, well, you also have to acquire knowledge. You have to confront your beliefs if you know there's people who think differently, and all the above. So there is no such a thing as a private belief, because your beliefs will always leak out both in your words and in your actions, and they will affect other people. Therefore, there is an ethics of what you believe. So what can we do about this? So I talked now about holding yourself responsible and trying to achieve integrity with your words. But you can, of course, also hold others responsible. And this does not mean you have to, tell people that they're idiots or they're wrong. But if someone says something you disagree with, you can just calmly say, I disagree with it, if the situation calls for it. But it can also mean that you assess others for whether they are maybe not achieving integrity, whether they're just confabulating words and not actually wrestling with truth at all. It can mean that, well, over time you just think very deeply who you listen to for what information, because someone might have partial knowledge. We all do have only partial knowledge. And, well, just be responsible around who you listen to, for what. Maybe also, if you think someone has very worrisome behavior epistemically, and you hear others listening to them maybe too much, you can also speak out about this. I'm not saying we should have a kind of a Gestapo or some kind of, network where everyone gets really harshly assessed. But it's really about sovereignty, right? Standing your ground, not just deferring to others casually, but asking yourself, should I listen to this person? Who are they? Do I think they have integrity or not? Because when you're trying to be cognitive sovereign, saying someone else said so is just not good enough as a justification for taking their beliefs as well. One important thing is also you have to avoid bullshit, which is now actually a technical term. And the very important difference between bullshit and lying is that the bullshitter, like the liar, knows the truth, but he chooses to not say it, while the bullshitter is just confabulating words to achieve their goal and is not even asking the question of what the truth even is. So bullshit is way more pervasive and, well, it's everywhere. So in particular, keeping track of who might be a bullshitter, you don't have to do it publicly, but just for yourself, might be an important step. Okay, but this is really hard because what should we be doing? Aren't we all ignorant? I mean, it's very hard to know anything. So how do we deal with the fact that we're all ignorant of most things? And well, the answer is epistemic humility. So, well, because we all can't know everything, we have to understand how little we understand on different subjects, right? This can also mean if someone, well, if it's a topic you actually know a lot about, well, you speak out more. If it's something you know very little about, you choose to speak out less. And most importantly, you try to understand how little you know or how much you know around a topic, and then this also helps you to properly acquire new information. There's multiple quotes I really love. First of all, a man can't learn what he thinks he already knows. True. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. He who knows best knows how little he knows. And it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. So fundamentally, we are all born ignorant. We are ignorant on most topics. This is the human condition because the world is extremely complex. But the liberation from this is understanding this fact and then surfing this radical uncertainty of life. And how can we practically approach it? Well, we just have measured speech, right? You don't speak with certainty, but you say, look, this is what I've studied, this is why I think this is the case. Or right, you just talk in degrees of belief. You make measured attempts at speaking about what you know. You put things in context, you say where you got the ideas from, or what happened to you for you to come to certain conclusions. Assuming we were all able to do this, this could afford us a dialogue for mutually afforded insight and a deeper grip to reality. It can be a collective process towards common knowledge and deeper knowledge. This is an idea by John Vervaeke, and well, you've probably heard ideas like thesis, antithesis, and synthesis before. But the idea is when I talk about what I really think is true and you talk about what you think is really true, over time we will, well, just learn more about the world. So here talked about mutual afforded insight. So what is insight? So because we can't, right, the world is not a collection of facts, we always have to take out and foreground parts of reality to make sense out of it and to take action. So we have to constantly solve the frame problem of the world. And because of this, it can also mean that over time, we can get a better way of foregrounding important information and change how we perceive the world, which is usually called improve our salience landscape. To visualize this, there's the very famous 9-dot problem, where the idea is connect those 9 dots with 4 lines that are connected to one another. You can look at it and see whether you could do it. So what usually happens when people try to solve it on paper is, well, they try out many different routes, how to do the 4 lines that are tied to one another, and it just doesn't work until they realize they're allowed to go outside of the box. This is literally where the term comes from, by the way. So there is an insight that needs to happen. You tried to solve the problem in a certain way. You thought there was a rule that was not there. You thought you had to stay inside of the box, but this wasn't so. At the moment you realize you didn't have to, you can solve the problem. So from one moment to the next, reformulating how you even think about the problem made you able to solve the problem. And now you can go back and always solve the 9 dot problem. So the idea is we have a frame, we have a way of how we construe the reality we're in. And sometimes we notice that this construal, well, it doesn't work. There's important ways in which it's holding us back. And then we stumble into chaos. But usually we stumble into chaos because we actually had known enough to notice anomalies. And now we can rebuild a better frame that makes us more able to be generally competent actors in the world. This is from a paper by Anderson from 2022. And he also has a fantastic subset, by the way. So deep insight means we have newer and better frames to have a grip on the world. And the idea is, well, when with measured, truthful speech, interact with one another, hopefully mutually afford deeper insights that can help each of us to have a better grip on reality and take meaningful actions inside of it. This process is also called wisdom, and John Vervaeke and Leonardo Ferraro have written a wonderful paper on it. So it's the idea, wisdom is basically meta-rationality, the idea of the process by which you become more and more rational over time. So the process of self-transformation of your own cognitive processing to overcome deception. And I do think we can mutually help each other to acquire more wisdom. Okay, now you could say, okay, this is all very nice, you know, I mean, you can just all be more truthful, but what about the incentives? I mean, we're usually not only not truthful because it's hard, but also, well, because it's usually just very beneficial to just not be truthful, because it's just nice, right, to pitch the startup project of your friend that you know is shit, but you really like your friend, therefore you say how amazing it is. It's just great because you want to help your friend. But of course, with doing that, you're polluting the information environment. So we have an information ecology around us, and we have some epistemic commons, and it makes a lot of sense that we're constantly having a race to the bottom in the epistemic commons, because whenever you're bending your words to your goals, you're usually better at winning. So what we cannot do is just pretend that this is not the case. And Hansi Freinacht, a meta-modern author, has argued that there are 3 stances you can take around problems of incentives. And, well, what are those stances? So first of all, you can always have game denial. You can't just pretend there are no incentives, we can just all choose to do the right things. This is typically when you say, oh, we could just all have equally wonderful resources because there are no limited resources. Everyone will have a villa and a pool, and that's just possible. Like, painting such utopias fundamentally ignores certain limits and game-like natures of reality, and that's the idea of game denial. So a lot of communist ideas are often very in game denial, and often just ignoring the game just pushes it somewhere else. You will pay the price in a different place later. The opposite stance is game acceptance. You say, oh, reality has a game-like nature, there are incentives, let's just play the game, play it hardcore, and let's just win the game. But of course, this has important costs for other things we also value. So this also falls short. So Hansi Freinacht argues for game change, where you stay mindful with the fact that there are incentives. Life, to some degree, has a game-like structure, and we have to notice it and wrestle with it. But we can also find the little spots where it is possible to do better and choose to do it there. A very famous book on this is also called Finite and Infinite Games, actually by a religious scholar. Further resources, one book I always recommend is The Elephant in the Brain. It's by Robin Hanson, and it's about our immense capability of producing confabulation. So even when you split the brain of a person, and one hand does something that the other part of the brain cannot know why they're doing it, the other part of the brain is able to confabulate very long essays about why they choose to do this. And this is true. This is really how humans work, and it's very important to understand that this is what we're doing and how immensely powerful our brains are at bullshitting. And the book is really useful with its different stories to help understand this tendency. And I think an important cost to see whether that's what you're doing is asking yourself, do you believe something costly? Do you believe something that if you said it out loud, people around you would not like you? Or they would find you weird, or they would distance themselves from it? You would achieve your goals less easily. Because if everything you believe is directly easily related to also everything you want to achieve, and your social cohesion and so forth, you might be confabulating. Well, so this was about the cognitive sovereignty part and why I think we should take epistemic responsibility and how you can do it. So let's have a couple more sentences on the meta crisis. So the meta crisis is basically an ongoing internet phenomenon of people that say, well, first of all, we're in a poly crisis. We have many ongoing problems that we want to solve and see changed in the world. But we also have a problem of making sense of the world and even starting to formulate how we could solve those problems, which they call the meta problem of the poly crisis. And it's this huge ecosystem of different podcasts and thinkers, and it's constantly evolving. There's also, this is the current map of, it's called the Second Renaissance. You will get the slide, so don't worry. So all of these people are very, very important to read up on or engage with, to my mind. You can take a different stance as cognitive sovereigns. And well, they all talk fundamentally about similar principles and the importance of cognitive sovereignty as well. One idea that is related and I find important is by David Chapman, the idea of meta-rationality. Because I think in our current age, it's very easy to, for example, dismiss the idea of truth and become a complete nihilist or relativist. And David Chapman, in The Cells of the Eggplant, he saves truth from both relativism but also absolutism, and explains that it is both a contextual and a purpose-related thing, right? And he gives the story of, okay, you have an eggplant in your fridge, and someone asks, is there water in the fridge? Now it really matters if they are a chemist and they want to put a substance that's highly explosive into the fridge, then you could say there is water in the fridge, right? Because there's water in the cells of the eggplant. But if it's just someone who wants something to drink and there's only an eggplant in the fridge and no bottle of water, then there's no water in the fridge. So there's both truth, but how you semantically communicate it is of course context dependent, but it's still there. It's just a deeper understanding of what truth even means. This is the idea of meta-rationality. Further resources. Hope I'm in time. So these are the books that I've mentioned so far. All of them are interesting, but you have to choose which of those are relevant for you. We'll also talk about more resources tomorrow. Then some of my favorite ones, when it comes to finding truth, The Scout Mindset by Julia Galef is a wonderful read that I'm always coming back to. And she was the founder of the Center for Applied Rationality. That's both, I think do they even still hold workshops, but they did workshops, might still be doing workshops to learn rational thinking, and they also have their own list of resources. Then there's the book by Steven Pinker about rationality and its different sub-tools from game theory to just like cognitive reflection tasks and understanding all these things. And by Gary Klein, Seeing What Others Don't, the remarkable ways we gain insight, also connecting it directly to perception in the world. The Future Thinkers, I don't know whether it's still online, have a course on cultivating sovereignty. It sounds interesting, I haven't done it, but I want to give it a call out anyway. Then there's Daniel Schmachtenberger with the Consilience Project, who very prominently talks about having better sense-making individually and collectively. Also has a lot of books online one can read. Has also great charts, for example, on good faith communication and bad faith communication. Then John Vervaeke, with all his research on rationality and wisdom, he has an amazing YouTube series called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis with 50 episodes, so don't commit too quickly. He also has a 5-episode summary on the Jim Rutt Show, which I usually recommend to start with instead of the whole series. But they're very deep philosophical pieces in there that I wouldn't want to miss in my life. So therefore I want to mention that he exists and is out there to be engaged with. Well, again, there's the liminal web that's constantly growing. And That's it. I want to, in this case, give a shout out or say my deep gratitude for all the people that have had their dialectical exchanges with me and helped me to better make sense of the world. And many of those people are, well, people I read, but also people more importantly, usually people I've actually met. There's this quote, "If I've seen further than others, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." So let's stand on each other's shoulders. There will be more tomorrow, like a full 3-hour session with more practical application. And I will also give one-on-one coaching. But all of this you hear tomorrow. This was just laying the groundwork.